The elegant restaurant was alive with the soft hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware against fine china. Chandeliers cast a warm glow over the room, and the faint scent of rosemary and freshly baked bread lingered in the air. It was the kind of place where business tycoons sealed deals and couples celebrated anniversaries. Tonight, however, the air was charged with something different, something heavier, unspoken. An electric. At a corner table near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a man and a woman sat, exuding a quiet yet commanding presence. The man, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, seemed like someone used to being in control, his sharp eyes scanning the room as if nothing escaped his notice. The woman beside him, a vision of elegance, wore a confident smile that suggested she was no stranger to these circles. There was an understated power in the way they carried themselves, though they spoke softly to one another, their laughter subdued but genuine. To an outsider, they could have been anyone, a wealthy couple out for a rare evening together. But to those who recognized them, they were far from ordinary. The waiter noticed them too. Young, brisk, and perhaps too eager to prove himself, he moved between tables with a kind of practiced efficiency, though his eyes lingered a beat longer than they should have when they landed on the couple. His expression was tight, his mouth a straight line. He didn't smile as he approached them, didn't even soften the sharpness in his tone as he greeted them. "Good evening. Are you ready to order, or do you need a few more minutes?" he asked, his words clipped, as if he were doing them a favor by taking their order. The woman glanced at him, her smile unwavering. "We're ready, thank you," she said, her voice polite but firm. She began to give her order, her tone calm and respectful, but as she spoke, the waiter's expression shifted. It wasn't obvious at first, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a subtle tightening of the jaw. But then came the interruptions. "Actually, ma'am, that dish is better suited to smaller appetites," he said, his tone laced with something that wasn't quite disdain but wasn't friendly either. The man looked up from his menu, his eyes locking onto the waiter. There was no immediate reaction, no outburst, just a calm, steady gaze that carried a weight far heavier than words. The woman, undeterred, politely reiterated her choice, but the waiter's demeanor didn't soften. In fact, it became more apparent that his attitude wasn't about the order or the food. It was about something else entirely. As the meal progressed, the pattern became harder to ignore. The waiter's tone grew colder with every interaction, his comments bordering on inappropriate. He would linger too long at other tables, offering warm smiles and attentive service, but when it came to the couple, his words were curt, his actions hurried. The man remained composed, observing quietly, but the woman's patience was wearing thin. She exchanged a glance with him, her eyebrows slightly raised, as if to ask, "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" By the time dessert was served, the atmosphere at their table had shifted. What had started as a pleasant evening was now overshadowed by an unspoken tension. The woman's smile had faded, replaced by a quiet resolve. The man, however, seemed almost too calm, as if waiting for something, perhaps for the moment when the truth would reveal itself. And then it happened. As the waiter placed the dessert plate on the table, his hand slipped slightly, causing the sauce to spill onto the pristine white tablecloth. "Oh, my mistake," he said, though there was no apology in his voice, only a faint smirk. The woman's eyes flickered with controlled anger, but she said nothing. Instead, she reached for her napkin, dabbing at the stain with practiced grace. It was the man who finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "Excuse me," he said, his tone commanding attention without raising an octave. "Is there a reason why you've treated us differently tonight?" The room seemed to pause for a moment, the surrounding chatter fading into the background. The waiter stiffened, his facade cracking for just a split second before he recovered. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir," he replied, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier. The man leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I think you know exactly what I mean." The tension at the table was palpable, drawing the eyes of nearby diners who sensed that something significant was unfolding. The waiter opened his mouth to respond, but the woman raised a hand, stopping him. "We've been patient," she said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "But I think it's time we address the real issue here." The waiter hesitated, his composure faltering under their combined gaze. He looked from the woman to the man, as if searching for an escape, but there was none. The couple wasn't going to let this slide, and the room was watching. What happened next would change the waiter's life forever, not because of the confrontation itself, but because of the truth that was about to be revealed. A truth he hadn't anticipated, one that would lay bare the consequences of his actions in a way he could never have imagined. The waiter took a step back, his face betraying a flicker of nervousness. He looked around the room, as if hoping someone might come to his rescue, but the other diners avoided his gaze. The once lively hum of the restaurant had now dimmed into an uneasy silence. It was clear that everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The man and the woman remained seated, their composure unwavering, though their presence seemed to grow even larger in the stillness. "I think it's best if we have a conversation away from the dining room," the man said, his tone measured but firm. There was no anger in his voice, just a quiet authority that left no room for argument. He motioned toward the side hallway that led to the staff area. The waiter hesitated, clearly weighing his options. He seemed to know that refusing would only draw more attention to himself, and so, with a reluctant nod, he gestured for them to follow him. The three of them rose from the table and walked toward the back, their steps echoing faintly against the tiled floor. The murmurs of the other diners followed them, though no one dared to speak too loudly. The hallway was dimly lit, lined with framed photos of the restaurant's history, chefs posing with famous guests, awards from local food critics, and candid snapshots of the staff during holiday celebrations. The waiter stopped near the door to the kitchen, crossing his arms defensively as he turned to face them. His earlier bravado had all but disappeared, replaced by a thinly veiled unease. "Look," he began, his tone sharper than it needed to be. "I don't know what you're implying, but I've treated you no differently than any other customer." The man tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "That's not true," he said simply. "And you know it." The waiter opened his mouth to protest, but the woman spoke up before he could. "From the moment we sat down, your behavior has been noticeable," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "You've been dismissive, curt, and let's not mince words here, blatantly disrespectful. And we deserve to know why." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. The waiter shifted uncomfortably, his arms tightening across his chest. He glanced toward the kitchen door, as if considering whether to walk away, but something in their expression stopped him. "What do you want me to say?" he asked, his voice defensive. "That I made a mistake? Fine, I'll say it. I messed up. I was having a bad night, okay? It's not personal." "Not personal?" the man echoed, his voice quiet but cutting. "If it's not personal, then why did you only treat us this way? Why not the other diners?" The waiter faltered, his eyes darting between them. For a moment, he seemed unsure of what to say. Then, almost imperceptibly, his gaze flickered to the woman's face, lingering there for just a second too long. It was subtle, but it was enough. The man noticed it too. "There it is," he said softly, almost to himself. He took a step closer, his presence suddenly more commanding. "You judged us before you even spoke to us, didn't you?" The waiter's face flushed red. "I didn't," he started, but his voice cracked under the weight of the accusation. He looked down at his shoes, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Look, I didn't mean for it to come across like that. I don't know. Maybe I wasn't thinking." "You weren't thinking," the woman repeated, her tone laced with disbelief. She exchanged a glance with the man, her expression a mix of frustration and sadness. "That's your explanation?" The waiter didn't respond. He looked like he wanted to disappear, his earlier arrogance replaced by a quiet shame. For a long moment, no one said anything. The muffled sounds of the kitchen staff working just beyond the door filled the silence, a stark contrast to the tension hanging in the hallway. The woman sighed, crossing her arms as she leaned against the wall. "We didn't come here looking for a fight," she said finally. "We came here to enjoy a meal, like everyone else. But you made it impossible for us to ignore the way you treated us. And now you want to brush it off as a bad night?" The waiter looked up, his expression conflicted. "I didn't mean to offend you," he said quietly. "I swear I didn't. I've been under a lot of pressure lately. This job isn't easy, you know?" "None of that excuses your behavior," the man replied, his voice still calm but firm. "But I believe you when you say you didn't mean to offend us. The question is, why did you treat us differently in the first place?" The waiter hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the kitchen door swung open, and a tall man in a chef's jacket stepped out. His presence was commanding, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Is everything all right here?" the chef asked, his gaze moving between the three of them. The man and the woman turned to him, their expressions softening slightly. "We were just having a conversation with your waiter," the man explained, his tone polite. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding, and we were trying to address it." The chef looked at the waiter, his brows furrowing slightly. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice laced with a quiet authority that mirrored the man's. The waiter shifted uncomfortably, avoiding the chef's gaze. "I was just explaining myself," he muttered. "It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal," the chef said firmly. "This restaurant prides itself on treating every guest with respect. If that didn't happen tonight, then we need to figure out why." The waiter glanced at the couple, his expression a mixture of guilt and resentment. "I didn't mean anything by it," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. I don't know. Maybe I judged them too quickly." The chef's expression darkened. "That's not how we do things here," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned to the couple, his expression softening. "I deeply apologize for any disrespect you've experienced tonight. It's unacceptable, and I assure you it will be addressed." The woman nodded, though her expression remained guarded. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We appreciate that." The chef turned back to the waiter, his gaze hard. "Take a break," he said, his tone brooking no refusal. "We'll talk about this later." The waiter hesitated, his shoulders slumping slightly, before nodding and walking away. The couple watched him go, their expressions thoughtful but unreadable. Once the waiter was out of sight, the chef turned back to them. "If there's anything I can do to make this right, please let me know," he said earnestly. "We value every guest who walks through our doors, and I want to ensure your experience reflects that." The man and the woman exchanged a glance, their silent communication speaking volumes. Finally, the man spoke. "We appreciate your apology," he said. "But this isn't just about us. It's about what this says about your establishment as a whole." The chef nodded, his expression serious. "I understand," he said. "And I assure you, we'll take this as an opportunity to improve." The couple nodded, though their expressions remained thoughtful. As they returned to their table, the tension in the room seemed to ease, though the atmosphere remained subdued. The other diners watched them with a mixture of curiosity and unease, sensing that the evening had taken on a significance far beyond a simple meal. As they sat down, the man leaned forward slightly, his expression contemplative. "This isn't over," he said quietly to the woman. "Not yet." The woman nodded, her eyes glinting with determination. "No," she agreed. "It's just the beginning." And with that, the stage was set for the truth to come to light, a truth that would not only reveal the depth of the waiter's actions but also force everyone involved to confront the uncomfortable realities hidden beneath the surface. The dining room was quieter now, the energy subdued but crackling with the tension of unanswered questions. The couple's table was a focal point, though they sat in calm composure, their expressions giving little away. Around them, The other diners whispered in hushed tones, exchanging glances and theories. Some speculated it was a disagreement about service, while others sensed something deeper was at play. Whatever the case, all eyes were on the couple and what might happen next. The man sipped his water thoughtfully, his fingers lightly tapping the glass. The woman sat back, her gaze scanning the room. She wasn't looking at anyone in particular, but the intensity in her eyes suggested she was piecing something together. It was clear they weren't just here to let things slide. There was purpose behind their actions, and that purpose was building towards something significant. Moments later, the restaurant manager approached their table. A tall woman with a professional demeanor and a calm but serious expression, she exuded authority. Her steps were deliberate, and the slight furrow in her brow showed she already knew the evening had taken a turn. She stopped a respectful distance from their table, her hands clasped in front of her. "I understand there's been an issue this evening," she began, her voice measured. "First and foremost, I want to sincerely apologize for any discomfort or disrespect you've experienced. It's not reflective of the standards we hold ourselves to." The woman at the table gave a small nod, her expression unreadable. "Thank you for acknowledging that," she said. "But this isn't just about an off moment, or a lapse in service. This is about something deeper, something we both know doesn't belong in an establishment like this or anywhere." The manager's brow furrowed slightly, her professionalism faltering for just a moment. "I'd like to understand better," she said, her tone careful. "Could you share more about what happened?" The man leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "It's not just about what happened," he said. "It's about why it happened. From the moment we arrived, your waiter made assumptions about us. He treated us differently not because of our order or the way we spoke, but because of something he decided the moment he looked at us." The manager's face paled slightly. She glanced around, as if gauging whether the conversation was drawing attention. Then she lowered her voice. "If that's the case, I want to assure you that it will be addressed. Discrimination of any kind is not tolerated here." The woman tilted her head slightly, her expression sharp. "We appreciate your intention to address it," she said. "But do you really understand how deep this goes? This isn't just a surface-level issue. It's something ingrained, a mindset that people carry with them and let seep into their actions, even when they think no one's watching." The manager hesitated, clearly uncomfortable but unable to deny the truth in the woman's words. "You're right," she said finally. "And it's something we need to confront, no matter how difficult it may be." The couple exchanged a glance, their expressions softening slightly. There was an understanding between them, a silent agreement that they weren't here to cause harm but to spark change. Still, the tension in the air remained thick, the unresolved nature of the situation weighing on everyone. At that moment, the waiter reappeared. He walked toward their table hesitantly, his earlier bravado now completely gone. His shoulders were hunched, his steps tentative, and his eyes avoided theirs. It was clear he had been spoken to, likely by the chef or another senior staff member, and he looked like a man grappling with the weight of his actions. He stopped a few steps away from the table, his hands fidgeting nervously at his sides. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet but earnest. "I messed up. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did." The woman studied him carefully, her expression unreadable. "Why did you treat us that way?" she asked, her voice calm but piercing. "What went through your mind when you decided we didn't deserve the same respect as everyone else in this room?" The waiter's face flushed, and he looked down at the floor. "I don't know," he admitted. I guess I assumed things about you. And I know that's wrong, but I didn't stop myself. I didn't even think about how it would feel if someone did that to me." The man leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And why did you assume those things?" he asked. "Be honest." The waiter hesitated, his breathing uneven. Because I judged you," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I judged you without even knowing you. And I'm sorry for that. I really am. The silence that followed was heavy, the weight of his confession hanging in the air. The couple didn't speak, their expressions thoughtful but unreadable. Around the room, the other diners pretended not to listen, but it was clear they were hanging on every word. The woman finally broke the silence. You've admitted your mistake, she said. That's a start. But what are you going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again? The waiter looked up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. I don't know, he said honestly. But I want to do better. I want to learn from this. The man nodded slowly, his expression softening. Acknowledging your mistake is the first step, he said. But it's not enough. Change requires action. It requires reflection. And it requires understanding the impact of your choices. The waiter nodded, his face a mixture of shame and determination. I'll do whatever it takes, he said. I promise. The couple exchanged a glance, their expressions still guarded but showing a flicker of hope. The tension in the room remained thick, but there was a sense that something was shifting, that the truth was finally coming to light. Still, the question lingered, would it be enough? The air in the dining room had shifted once more, the waiter's apology hanging between them like a fragile thread. There was a pause, a sense that perhaps things were beginning to settle, but then the woman tilted her head slightly, her sharp gaze fixed on the manager. The softness in her expression was gone, replaced by something more calculated, more probing. There's something I still don't understand, she said, her voice calm but unrelenting. You've apologized, you've assured us this behavior doesn't reflect the values of your establishment, but if that's true, why was he so comfortable acting this way in the first place? The manager blinked, caught off guard by the question. I can't speak to what was going through his mind, she stammered. But I assure you don't assure us, the man interrupted, his voice steady but firm. Ask yourself why a member of your team felt emboldened enough to treat guests this way. Behavior like this doesn't come from nowhere. It thrives in environments where it's ignored or worse, condoned. The manager looked visibly flustered now, her professionalism faltering as she searched for a response. We take these matters very seriously, she said, her voice slightly strained. And we'll investigate thoroughly to ensure this doesn't happen again. The woman leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Investigate what, exactly? Because this isn't just about him. It's about a culture, a mindset that allowed this to happen. Are you really ready to face that? Or are you just hoping this will blow over if you apologize enough times? The tension in the room escalated again, sharper than before. The other diners exchanged nervous glances, their whispers growing louder as they tried to piece together what was happening. The waiter, still standing nearby, looked increasingly uncomfortable, his shoulders hunched and his eyes fixed on the floor. Before the manager could respond, the door to the kitchen swung open again, and the chef stepped out. His expression was calm but serious, and he walked toward the table with purpose. I couldn't help overhearing, he said, his voice steady. And I think it's time we all had an honest conversation. The manager's eyes widened slightly, and she opened her mouth to speak, but the chef held up a hand to stop her. This isn't just about one waiter, he continued, his gaze moving between the couple and the manager. It's about the environment we've created here or failed to create. And that's on all of us. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over everyone. The couple exchanged a glance, their expressions softening slightly, though their guard remained up. It was clear they hadn't expected this turn of events. The chef turned to the couple, his expression earnest. I want to thank you for speaking up, he said. Because the truth is, this isn't the first time we've had complaints about staff behavior. And every time, we've told ourselves it was an isolated incident, something we could fix with a warning or a bit of extra training. But clearly, that hasn't been enough. The manager's face flushed, and she looked like she wanted to interrupt, but the chef didn't give her the chance. The truth is, he said, his voice heavy, we've been complicit. Maybe not intentionally, but by not addressing the root of the problem, we've allowed it to continue. And for that, I'm deeply sorry. The couple was silent for a moment, clearly taken aback by his candor. Finally, the man nodded slowly. Acknowledging the problem is a start, he said. But what are you going to do about it? The chef hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. I don't have all the answers yet, he admitted. But I promise you this, we're going to take a hard look at ourselves and make the changes that need to be made. Not just for you, but for everyone who walks through our doors. The waiter looked up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. I don't know, he said honestly. But I want to do better. I want to learn from this. The man nodded slowly, his expression softening. Acknowledging your mistake is the first step, he said. But it's not enough. Change requires action. It requires reflection. And it requires understanding the impact of your choices. The waiter nodded, his face a mixture of shame and determination. I'll do whatever it takes, he said. I promise. The couple exchanged a glance, their expressions still guarded but showing a flicker of hope. The tension in the room remained thick, but there was a sense that something was shifting, that the truth was finally coming to light. Still, the question lingered, would it be enough? The air in the dining room had shifted once more, the waiter's apology hanging between them like a fragile thread. There was a pause, a sense that perhaps things were beginning to settle, but then the woman tilted her head slightly, her sharp gaze fixed on the manager. The softness in her expression was gone, replaced by something more calculated, more probing. There's something I still don't understand, she said, her voice calm but unrelenting. You've apologized, you've assured us this behavior doesn't reflect the values of your establishment, but if that's true, why was he so comfortable acting this way in the first place? The manager blinked, caught off guard by the question. I can't speak to what was going through his mind, she stammered. But I assure you don't assure us, the man interrupted, his voice steady but firm. Ask yourself why a member of your team felt emboldened enough to treat guests this way. Behavior like this doesn't come from nowhere. It thrives in environments where it's ignored or worse, condoned. The manager looked visibly flustered now, her professionalism faltering as she searched for a response. We take these matters very seriously, she said, her voice slightly strained. And we'll investigate thoroughly to ensure this doesn't happen again. The woman leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Investigate what, exactly? Because this isn't just about him. It's about a culture, a mindset that allowed this to happen. Are you really ready to face that? Or are you just hoping this will blow over if you apologize enough times? The tension in the room escalated again, sharper than before. The other diners exchanged nervous glances, their whispers growing louder as they tried to piece together what was happening. The waiter, still standing nearby, looked increasingly uncomfortable, his shoulders hunched and his eyes fixed on the floor. Before the manager could respond, the door to the kitchen swung open again, and the chef stepped out. His expression was calm but serious, and he walked toward the table with purpose. I couldn't help overhearing, he said, his voice steady. And I think it's time we all had an honest conversation. The manager's eyes widened slightly, and she opened her mouth to speak, but the chef held up a hand to stop her. This isn't just about one waiter, he continued, his gaze moving between the couple and the manager. It's about the environment we've created here or failed to create. And that's on all of us. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over everyone. The couple exchanged a glance, their expressions softening slightly, though their guard remained up. It was clear they hadn't expected this turn of events. The chef turned to the couple, his expression earnest. I want to thank you for speaking up, he said. Because the truth is, this isn't the first time we've had complaints about staff behavior. And every time, we've told ourselves it was an isolated incident, something we could fix with a warning or a bit of extra training. But clearly, that hasn't been enough. The manager's face flushed, and she looked like she wanted to interrupt, but the chef didn't give her the chance. The truth is, he said, his voice heavy, we've been complicit. Maybe not intentionally, but by not addressing the root of the problem, we've allowed it to continue. And for that, I'm deeply sorry. The couple was silent for a moment, clearly taken aback by his candor. Finally, the man nodded slowly. Acknowledging the problem is a start, he said. But what are you going to do about it? The chef hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. I don't have all the answers yet, he admitted. But I promise you this, we're going to take a hard look at ourselves and make the changes that need to be made. Not just for you, but for everyone who walks through our doors. The man stepped forward then, his expression serious. This, he said, gesturing to the documents, is a detailed report on this restaurant's operations. Complaints filed by former employees, reviews hidden from public view, and instances of misconduct that were brushed under the rug. All of it points to a systemic problem that goes far beyond a single waiter. The chef's eyes widened, and he glanced at the manager, who looked as though she might faint. How did you get this? The chef asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman gave a small, wry smile. Let's just say we have resources, she said. And we care deeply about holding businesses accountable, especially ones that claim to stand for inclusivity and respect but fail to uphold those values. The room was stunned, the revelation hitting like a thunderclap. The other diners watched in shock, their earlier curiosity now replaced by disbelief. The manager opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Finally, the chef spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. You're right, he said quietly. We've failed. And it's time we face that. The woman nodded, her expression softening slightly. Acknowledging the problem is the first step, she said, echoing his earlier words. But what happens next is what really matters. This isn't just about apologies or promises. It's about real change. The chef nodded, his jaw tightening with determination. You have my word, he said. We'll make this right. And not just for show. We'll do the work. The couple exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. Then the man stepped forward, extending a hand to the chef. We'll be watching, he said. And if you need guidance, we'll be here. The chef shook his hand firmly, a flicker of hope in his eyes. As the couple turned to leave, the woman paused, looking back at the waiter, who stood frozen near the edge of the scene. Remember, she said, her voice gentle but firm. This isn't the end of the road for you. It's the beginning. Make it count. The waiter nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and determination. As the couple walked out of the restaurant, the room was silent, the weight of the evening's events settling over everyone. But just as the door closed behind them, a final twist emerged, a small card left on the table, its gold embossed lettering catching the light. The chef picked it up, his eyes widening as he read the name of a well-known organization dedicated to combating workplace discrimination. The realization hit like a bolt of lightning. They hadn't just encountered two dissatisfied diners, they had crossed paths with people who had the power to change everything. And with that, the story took on a whole new meaning, leaving the restaurant staff to grapple with what lay ahead. The restaurant remained in a hushed state long after the couple had left. The weight of what had transpired lingered in the air, a stark reminder that the night wasn't just about a single incident but about a much larger reckoning. The gold-embossed card in the chef's hand felt heavier than it should have, its significance clear to everyone who had witnessed the events unfold. The manager took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her blazer. We need to talk, she said quietly, addressing the chef. Her voice carried a mix of fear and resolve, as if she knew this conversation was long overdue. The chef nodded, his expression serious. Not just us, he replied. The entire team. Every single person needs to be involved in this. They exchanged a look of understanding before the manager turned to the waiter, who still stood rooted in place, his face pale and eyes wide. "You'll be part of this too," she said firmly. "But for now, I think it's best if you go home. Take time to reflect on what happened tonight. We'll speak again tomorrow." The waiter nodded hesitantly, murmuring a quiet thank you before retreating toward the staff exit. As the door swung shut behind him, the chef addressed the remaining diners, who were still seated, their meals half finished and their expressions uncertain. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm but commanding, "I'd like to apologize once again for what you witnessed tonight. This was not how any guest should be treated, and I take full responsibility for what happened. I ask for your understanding as we work to address these issues and ensure they don't happen again." There was a murmur of approval from the diners, some nodding in support, while others quietly gathered their things to leave. One older woman near the front raised her hand, and when the chef acknowledged her, she said, "It takes courage to own up to mistakes. I hope you follow through on your promises." The chef gave her a small, grateful smile. "We will," he said. "Thank you for your patience." As the remaining guests finished their meals or paid their bills, the staff began cleaning up the dining room, the usual end-of-night chatter replaced with a solemn silence. The manager and chef stayed behind, sitting at one of the empty tables with the gold embossed card between them. "This is a wake-up call," the manager said after a long pause, her voice heavy with regret. "We've been so focused on maintaining appearances that we ignored the cracks beneath the surface." The chef nodded. "We've been reactive instead of proactive," he agreed. "Tonight wasn't just about one person's behavior, it was about a culture we allowed to fester." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their responsibilities pressing down on them. Finally, the chef spoke. "First thing tomorrow, we'll hold a staff meeting. Everyone will have a chance to speak openly about their experiences, their concerns, and what they think needs to change. No judgment, no repercussions." The manager hesitated. "Do you think they'll trust us enough to be honest?" she asked. "They will if we show them we're serious," the chef replied. "And we'll need outside help too. The people who left that card. They're offering us a lifeline, even if it doesn't feel like it right now." The manager picked up the card, running her fingers over the embossed lettering. "Do you think they'll work with us after what happened tonight?" she asked. The chef met her gaze. "I think they'll want to," he said. "Because they believe in change. Just like we need to." The next morning, the staff gathered in the dining room, their usual routines paused for the impromptu meeting. The atmosphere was tense, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension hanging over the group. The chef and manager stood at the front, their expressions serious but open. "Thank you all for coming," the chef began, his voice steady. "Last night was a turning point for this restaurant. We saw firsthand the consequences of ignoring issues that should have been addressed long ago. And we realized that change has to start with us." The manager stepped forward, her voice softer but no less firm. "This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame," she said. "It's about creating a culture of respect, accountability, and growth. That means being honest with each other, and with ourselves." The staff exchanged uncertain glances, but slowly, hands began to rise. One by one, team members shared their experiences, stories of feeling unheard, undervalued, or unsupported. Some spoke about witnessing inappropriate behavior but feeling powerless to intervene. Others admitted to their own mistakes, acknowledging how they had contributed to the toxic patterns. As the meeting progressed, the atmosphere shifted. What began as a tense and reluctant discussion transformed into an open dialogue, with ideas and solutions flowing freely. By the time the meeting ended, there was a palpable sense of hope in the room, a feeling that change was not only possible but already beginning. In the weeks that followed, the restaurant underwent a transformation. Training sessions were held to address biases and improve communication. Policies were rewritten to ensure transparency and accountability. An external consultant was brought in to guide the process, helping the team navigate difficult conversations and build a stronger foundation. The couple who had sparked the change returned to the restaurant a month later, their presence sending a ripple of recognition through the staff. This time, they were greeted warmly, their experience a complete contrast to their first visit. The waiter who had once been the source of conflict approached their table with a calm and sincere demeanor, his growth evident in every word and action. "Welcome back," he said, his voice steady but genuine. "I want to thank you for what you did. It wasn't easy to face the truth, but because of you, we've all learned to be better." The woman smiled, her expression soft but knowing. "It takes courage to admit mistakes," she said. "But it takes even more to learn from them. Keep going." As the couple enjoyed their meal, the atmosphere in the restaurant felt lighter, more vibrant. The staff moved with confidence and purpose, their interactions marked by respect and camaraderie. The transformation wasn't complete, it would take time and continuous effort, but the foundation had been laid. When the couple left that night, they did so with the knowledge that their actions had made a difference. They hadn't just changed the course of one evening, they had set a chain of events in motion that would ripple far beyond the walls of the restaurant. And as they stepped out into the cool night air, they exchanged a glance that said everything. Sometimes, the hardest conversations lead to the most meaningful change.